Hi, everyone, and welcome to our August Higher Education Tableau User Group meeting. We are going to be recording the session today for anyone who can't make it or wants to go back and rewatch it later. And as always, we invite you to join us on our Slack channel. And I believe Urchioli has already put the link in the chat once, but we can do that again. So what are we going to cover today? We are going to meet a community member, Soraya Campbell from Duke University. And then we're going to learn about Tooltips, cool tricks from Laura Urchioli from MIT. And we're going to wrap it up with best practices in data visualization by Jenn Schilling from the University of Arizona. Right before we break out into our chat rooms, which are going to be themed today. And if you haven't heard about that already, we're going to take a suggestion from the community and break up the chat rooms based on your role at your institution and have moderators to lead those groups. So if you haven't stuck around for a networking session after an HETUG meeting before, today might be a perfect day to start. If you have any announcements, we would like to invite you to come off of mute and make your announcement. If you have any job openings that you want to promote, you can announce those or drop them in the chat box. And I do believe Roshni also put in the link for our open positions Slack channel. So I'll give you just a minute. Anybody have any announcements to make? All right, there's an announcement from UC Berkeley. They're hiring a senior business analyst. I guess if nobody else has anything, I will jump in and say Appalachian State University is also hiring in my office, and I will look up that link and put it in the chat box in just a minute. All right, then. I guess we better get started. Our Meet a Community member today is Soraya Campbell from Duke University, where she is the Assistant Director of Global Education. Sariah is a data-driven, creative problem solver. She has 18 years of experience working with institutions of higher education. So currently she serves as the Assistant Director of Global Education at Duke. And part of her role, she manages and analyzes and visualizes data pertaining to experiential learning programs, both domestically and internationally. So in addition to creating analyses and visualizations in Tableau, she's also interested in and very excited about analyzing textual data using techniques such as machine learning classification, lexicon-based sentiment analysis. I need your help with that, by the way. TF-IDF and topic modeling. She's constantly finding new ways to get in trouble. To utilize analysis methods that are fun and interesting and useful to extract actionable insights from her data. So, Soraya, welcome and thank you for being our Meet a Community member today.
Thank you.
So you all know how this works by now. I'm going to ask a few questions about Soraya and her job and how she uses Tableau, and then we'll move into the lightning round. So if you're ready, you could just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and describe your role and your team.
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me here. So I'm currently Assistant Director in the Duke Global Education Office. What that means is that I do a lot of program management for our overseas and domestic programs that are run by Duke. So we run like what you would kind of call like study abroad sites, but we call it study away because we also have domestic programs. And, they're mainly programs that we work with Duke administration and faculty to create education abroad programs or education away programs. And then I also manage them. And I also manage in our office a team of 4 direct reports, mainly advisors, and I coordinate the work of our international and domestic away team members.
So tell us a little about what types of data you work with.
So in international education, I mainly work with enrollment data. So as you can imagine, with students going in and also are going out and coming in, like so study abroad students, and also previously in my other roles, international students coming in. There's just a lot of like enrollment data that we work with. Also too, what I've really enjoyed with international education and the global nature of our programs is working with like chloropleth maps, like to the geographical nature. Like people want to know where people are going, right? And so I've really enjoyed working with like mapping data and all that stuff. So and again, so for example, the enrollment data that we work with, people on campus want to know for just planning purposes, like how many students are actually going to be here on campus. You guys are sending away like 500 students. Okay, like housing wants to know that so they can plan for their the spaces that they'll have on campus, and so on and so forth. And then there's also a lot of external reporting that we do in previous roles. In other institutions that I've worked for, I have mainly done the Open Doors report that is, coordinated by the Department of State. And that's like the main, like, US report on like global mobility between, students in the US and then students coming in to schools here in the US.
So in addition to your maps, how else do you use Tableau at work?
So it's mainly setting up dashboards for mainly internal stakeholders to view this type of data. And, I've also done projects sort of surrounding this issue, just like enrollment data as well. I've served, like, for example, on the management committee for a Duke learning program called Winter Breakaway. It was like a new type of learning program that Duke tried out. That was sort of like a micro-credential short-term learning program for students to learn like Python and like UX UI design and all that. And so because it was new, our stakeholders, like the provost office and all that, they wanted to assess the efficacy of it. So we had to report out with the data. And so, like, for example, I was the one that used Tableau in order to visualize the data, like not only enrollment, but I also used it like a combination of R and Tableau in analyzing survey data. And so the assessments that came out of it. And so, again, just using a lot of like Tableau for like reporting and enrollment data.
So what would be the favorite Tableau project that you've worked on? Take your time. Soraya is getting over a cold, so.
Yes, so thank you. So actually my favorite project would be, I did a contract gig with, while I was in grad school for the North Carolina State Friday Institute. And so with that, I did a dashboard, a collaborative project with my professor. I was in my graduate program for learning analytics. And it had to do a lot more with K through 12 data, which was a departure for me. But it was really interesting because the data had to be pivoting on multiple levels. And so it was like a little bit more complicated than what I was normally used to. Oh, sorry. And but I learned a lot, and it was a lot of like collaboration. And one really great thing was that I introduced Tableau Prep to the team over there, and it was like a really great thing because previously we were using R a lot just for the transformation of the data, and I think Tableau Prep was a more sustainable solution for them, especially since I was supposed to give over to data to somebody else because it was a contract gig. Being able to like, okay, the flow is already set up. You just have to upload that information and then, with new data and all that. So it was great.
So how long have you been using Tableau and how did you learn about it?
Yeah, so I've been using it for about 5-ish years, but I really got into it a lot more the past 2 to 3 years. And how I learned, like, I'm really interesting type of learner. I like to just play around with it myself at first. I don't really use, I'm like the person that doesn't use instructions when they first get something. So I really played around with it at first because I had a project in mind. I heard about it through my colleagues that work in institutional research. And, there was this workflow thing that we had going on here. And I thought it would be interesting to analyze it visually and to show it off to our office. So I kind of played around with it like that. But then I started looking into like the Tableau resources and looking at YouTube tutorials, for example. And then I enrolled in my the graduate program that I mentioned in learning analytics. And then, we most definitely covered Tableau, best practices in visualization and like data governance and like, how to use student data or learning related data, but like in a fashion that's like, respectful to students and all that type of stuff. So definitely got, a lot of resources there, and learning from my colleagues as well is how I learned a lot of the Tableau that I know today.
Do you have a favorite Tableau feature?
Definitely. I like the animations. I love animations. I love using them, especially time series types of visualizations. I think animations are great for that.
Those are a lot of fun. Is there something that you would like to learn more about in Tableau?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm always up to up my game with just best practices with visualizations. Like for example, I think it's Stephanie Evergreen, like her book on storytelling with data. And then, for example, I see a lot the iron vizzes that come out from people who are doing it in Tableau. And, I just would love to up my game when it comes to more sophisticated, like really nice looking visualizations.
Well, you definitely signed on the right day because Jenn Schilling is going to do a best practices in data visualization.
Yeah.
Yeah, this
Awesome.
afternoon. So what is one thing you wish you could go back in time and tell Tableau newbie you?
Yes, I wish I would have connected with this community a lot earlier. And I just remember too, like I found it almost at the same time that I was going through my learning analytics program. And it was such a lifesaver for me because I was able to collaborate and learn from a lot of people through this community. So I think I was also nervous at first. Like I was like, well, I don't know as much. I don't want to speak up because what if I say something wrong? But I don't think anybody should feel like that. Definitely connect with people. Everybody, like most people that I've known that use Tableau are so like ready to help people, no matter what stage they are with their learning journey. Yeah.
And do you use Tableau outside of work? And if so, how do you use it?
Not as much as I would like, but I do have some projects that I would like to do, and to like submit for like Visit the Day and Tableau Public, having to do with international education. So
awesome. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share before we get into the lightning round?
no, only that like again, like if I just was that newbie question resonated with me, and I was just thinking like anybody on here that's a newbie, like definitely connect with the people in this group. And I just wish I did that way earlier, and because again, learning from other people has been such a great help for me.
I couldn't agree more. All right, Rishi, are you ready? The lightning round. So we're going to start off, since you're from or living in North Carolina, would you go with Cheerwine or Pepsi?
Cheerwine. I just prefer the taste, definitely.
And Tabasco or Texas Pete?
So this one was a little bit hard for me because I know Texas Pete is actually from North Carolina, but I prefer Tabasco over Texas Pete. But I would like to say that I am a Caribbean girl, and these are not even in the ballpark of what I really like. I really like my hot sauces. So like sriracha is like mild to me.
I hear you. I
Oh,
love
that's
hot sauce.
yeah.
All right, next up, Eastern barbecue or Western barbecue?
I have to say I like Eastern better. Eastern's the vinegar based one,
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yeah. For
Mhm.
anybody who's not down with the North Carolina barbecue, it's Eastern is vinegar based and Western is more tomato based, sweeter. Yeah.
Mhm.
And next up, knock jokes or chicken crossing the road jokes in honor of National Tell a Joke Day.
So because of my children who are 4 and 6, they've been totally into chicken crossing the road jokes. So
Nice.
I will have to say that. Mhm.
I have to say both of those visits are a lot of fun and everybody should go check them out. All right, next up, Hungary or Turkey?
So again, man, you're just hitting me with the hard stuff right now, but I will say that I have to choose Turkey. Turkey to me holds a special place in my heart because I used to manage a program, Duke's program in Istanbul. And it was just an amazing program, and like the academics and people, everything over there, it was just amazing. So Turkey.
Awesome. And because we have to ask, UNC or Duke?
Definitely, I will say Duke. I will say it's funny working at Duke, the amount of UNC fans that work here, it's actually very surprising, but I'll have to say Duke.
And I had a friend who went to UNC but was a diehard Duke fan. Next up, because I believe you've lived in both places, Charleston, South Carolina or Durham, North Carolina?
I know you guys are just killing me right now. But I'll have to say Durham because it's an amazing place to live, honestly. And the only thing I think Charleston would have over me is the food. I think the food game in Charleston is, a little bit tighter here, but Durham is my preference.
I know I'm a big fan of both cities too.
Mm-hmm.
And last but not least, Gators or Cougars?
Gators, definitely. That is an easy one. Gators, go Gators.
Well, thank you so much for being our Meet of Community member for the month of August. Our plan is to have the spotlight every month. So if you're interested in being our community member, please reach out to the co-leads and let us know.
Great, thank you.
All right, so up next.
Tooltips, cool tricks. 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 Tooltips, cool tricks.
So up next, we have Laura Urchioli from MIT. So Laura is a data analyst in MIT's Resource Development Department, aka Fundraising or Advancement. She's actually on my old team, and she's been on the major and principal gift side for a little under a year, but she worked in our Alumni Association for about 5 years before that. And at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, not Worcester, nope. It's Worcester, no. Worcester. WPI, Worcester. Oh, right, you don't say the R's, I forgot.
Yeah, you don't even say the R, Worcester.
In WPI before that. And just a quick side note, so Laura is one of the big reasons that the HE Tug exists. So we started an unofficial user group for advancement staff at MIT a few years before the pandemic, in part because my team, the resource development side, wanted to talk to our alumni association and see how do they use the same exact data and Tableau and DataViz. And we ended up just talking about a whole bunch of things. And Laura was our Tableau person for the Alumni Association. So that group eventually grew into grew to have a larger audience and sort of brought up that idea of, hey, maybe we need a higher ed tug. So that's how
a lot of venting. A lot of you and me in an office room inventing now.
That is very, very true. So Laura, if you want to take it away, I promise. No more,
Yes.
no more weird sounds from
No
my
more
computer.
terrifying sounds. It is the best. I think we were deciding on whether or not we counted it as music earlier, because it is so like close to the music. Hold on. Does everybody see this? Do you guys all see just the slides, or do you see my Zoom like hovering thing too?
You are, you are good.
Okay, perfect. I hate how the little Zoom hovery thing like always seems to go right over something. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's invisible. But then one day I saw it when somebody was presenting and I became very anxious. All right, so my name is Laura Urchioli. It's like urchin ravioli. It's very Italian. And like Roshni said, I'm over at MIT. And like the little fact of the day said, I'm originally from New York City, Queens. So if anybody here is from New York, that's where I was born and raised. It's got a place in my heart. And today I'm talking a little bit about tooltips. So I know what you're all thinking, what are tooltips? No, you're probably not all thinking that. Probably most of you have used a tooltip here or there, but they're a highly underutilized feature of Tableau. Tooltips, in case you don't know, if you're making a Tableau viz and you're in that kind of features pills box, you're gonna see that little icon that has like a speech bubble, and that's a tooltip. And what that actually creates is that kind of hovering thing right over. So when you hover over a piece of information, you're going to see some other information. Tableau creates kind of a default one. It'll plug whatever value. So whatever value is in that square is going to plug in that tooltip, but it is so much more than that. And it can do so much more. So the first thing to really kind of get you jazzed about playing with tooltips is to play up how you format your tooltip. Again, when you first create a Tableau viz, Tableau kind of has a default. It's just going to throw in the value that you have it hovered over into your tooltip. And that can be really helpful if you're not using like a label on your graph and you want to be able to hover over a bar and see that it's, you know, for $8,000 or whatever your viz is showing. And that's really great. But it can help you do so much more. It can help you show extra points of data that you can't show in your visualization. It can help explain your data to your users if it's something a little confusing. And it's actually a level of detail that can be used to break up your data even further. So there's a couple different fun ways I've been playing around with formatting tooltips. We're currently right now, MIT finished a campaign. So we're like up to our neck in data. And we're trying to get all this data out to our users. So I am like in tooltip land, making sure that there is information just jam-packed in this viz. And one of the things that's really important to me is making sure my users are able to understand the data that they're seeing. So you'll see in this first example, it's using a heat map. I think heat maps are a great place to play around with making good tooltips because, especially if it's a big heat map, it can be a little bit easy to get lost in like where you are in that horizontal, vertical kind of axes world, right? So maybe it's easy for your user to see that they're hovering over January 2018, so it's right next to the labels. But maybe you go over to March 2021, it's going to be a little bit harder for them to know what month and what year it is just by hovering over it, just looking over it. And so using a tooltip to explain that is really important. So here, you know, I use a couple different features. You use color, types of font, so make your tooltip helpful. You know, there's a lot of things that we as Tableau, you know, dashboard builders use in the actual dashboard, in the actual view that you can then translate that to your tooltip. You know, things that'll make it pop, make it easier to understand. So here, you know, they can easily see this as furniture. That means there's probably even more. This is a huge heat chart. Again, easy to get lost in. We have the January 2018 formatted, so it looks like a date. That's something that's really simple, really easy. But sometimes users can get a little lost in because it's hard to think of it. You know, you don't think of dates in this kind of way, right? It doesn't kind of make sense to our normal user easily. And then we have the sale. So that's that number again in the tooltip. That's always helpful. And then we have a secondary piece of information. You have profit in there. So this is a really great example of kind of a simple way to vamp your tooltip game up. The next one is something that I've been using really heavily in my current viz. And it's kind of turning your tooltip into a sentence. Again, I think this is a really great use case when you look at a giant heat map, especially if you're introducing a concept that might be a little bit more complicated. It's really good to put things in a way that people can understand, that your users can understand. You have this big data viz, you have this big heat chart. It's going to be overwhelming. What is your user going to look for? So here I have it structured as if it was a sentence. In January 2018, furniture sales accounted for, there's your value and sales, and value for profit. This is really simple. When you're writing that tooltip in that little edit, you're basically just going to write a sentence in, and then you're going to insert that month, you're going to insert that year, you're going to insert that category. It's really a simple thing to do. You can add, if you want to get fancy, I sometimes will make some calculated fields to change it up. Like maybe there's, a really special date. I want them to be like, why is this number, so crazy? March 2020, right? Maybe I have a secondary little calculated field in there that says like, this is the beginning of the pandemic. Things are crazy. But I put it in layman's term. I put it in a sentence. And this is something that I think helps our users so that when they're hovering over it, they're kind of reading this out as if they would think it. And again, it's really helpful in heat maps specifically, I think, because it can be overwhelming and really big. So I love this. This is something I've been doing a lot. And then the other kind of cool thing you can do with tooltips is use it for like a third level of categorization. So you'll see I have this bar chart. I'm looking at different regions, so West, East, Central, South, and I'm looking at how many sales they had over time, over the 4 fiscal years, right? And maybe the real central thing I want them to grasp is, 2021 is a big year, or that West tends to be a little bit higher. But I know that my user is also going to be interested in these subcategories, these furniture, what was the other stuff? Technology. This is all from Superstore, which I'm sure you've all played with. And that's something that I don't want them to be distracted by, right? So I don't necessarily want to add that to the color shelf, because then you're going to have like even more stuff going on. I don't necessarily want to add it as an X or a Y or a filter. I don't want them to get distracted by that data point, but I know my users are going to ask me to break it down further. And so here we're actually using that on the mark shelf. So it's splitting that up, but I'm only drawing reference to it in that tooltip. So now my user can quickly hover over it and get those values, but it's not distracting them from that overarching kind of actual conclusion I want them to come to. And this is really great when you have users who may get caught up in like really small pieces of data. And you're like, I understand that you want to know that number, but the story that we're telling, it's really important that you see this trend. And so this is a great way to marry those two things together. So that's the idea of formatting tooltips. I think that we all, there's a lot of really fun things. I started really enjoying playing in tooltips, obviously. And it can do a lot of cool things. And this is really a great beginning point. It's just kind of rethinking, think of your tooltips as like a cheat sheet for your users, a way that can help them kind of do more than just, call out a number. Another really fun thing that not everybody has done, and honestly, I had not done for most of my Tableau user or Tableau building career, was actually putting a viz in a tooltip. So you can actually embed vizzes in tooltips. So let's say I have a main view, just looking at some general data. This is looking at region, count of customers, nothing crazy, very top kind of line. And I have this kind of supplemental view, and this is looking at customers ranked by, I think, the top 10 customers ranked by number of sales, right? And people really want to see that specifically on that region kind of breakdown. And what I want to happen is you're going to hover over West and bam, there's your top 10, customers or individuals for West. You hover over East, it's going to change to those people. And again, this is really good for data that people are going to want, that's supplemental, but is not the main focus of your data. You still want the main focus to be, West and East tend to be your big players, or maybe a specific year is like, a worse year than others, whatever that may be. But, your user is going to say, well, doesn't, West have Raymond in it? And he's this super big customer, blah, blah, blah. And they're going to get really, they want to check that information. And this is a way to quickly do this. So how that's actually done is when you edit the tooltip, it's going to bring up this pop-up box. The big white box is where you type, you insert stuff. You click that insert caret, that little drop down. The first option is going to be sheets. And you just select the sheet that you want in the tooltip. So here, even the name of my sheet was sales. You click on that, and it's going to pop in actual kind of text code will show up. So you'll see that top left photo. it says, sheet name equals customer rank, blah, 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 blah. That's the code that's actually building out that view to show up. So if I press OK, you're going to start seeing this view grouped by, in this case, region, showing up in the tooltip. There is a couple issues. When I first did this, you can actually see on the right, view is too large. That's going to happen sometimes. What that means is that the tooltip's too small and my bars are a little bit bigger. To do that, you're going to play around with that code. It actually plugs out for you. So you'll see in that code, we have sheet name equals customer rank. So that's talking about the name of the sheet. Max width and max height. Those are something you're going to play around with. You're going to bump that out to maybe 400, maybe 500. See what kind of size you need. Again, that is going to change the size of your tooltip. So, be wary about making it like 1200. That would be quite a large tooltip. And at that point, maybe it shouldn't be an embedded view. But it could be helpful when you just need a little bit more. You can see this tooltip just need to be a little bit wider to have this information in it. So that's kind of a common issue that you're going to come into with this. There also could be a little bit that filter, as you can see, it says filter by all fields. The idea being it's kind of transferring those filters from your main view over to your supplemental view. Sometimes depending on how your data is structured, I'm sure we've all been there. Our data is not perfect. We don't have superstore data. It can be a little finicky. And so that's something I've really had to play around with, changing the filter, adding an extra filter. Again, this is a great place to reach out to your Tableau community, Google, the higher ed Tableau user group. If you have a local user group, people might have quick fixes because again, it can be a little bit annoying just trying to figure out what's the filter that's kind of messing it up because all of our data can be a little finicky. But other than that, it's a really great resource to have that ability to embed a smaller, again, supplemental viz into kind of a main viz. And it can get even more exciting. I learned this in my current dashboard I've been working on. I wanted different sheets to show up for different things. And this is really important if maybe some different things are really important. So here you can see my kind of main sheets looking at the 3 categories of sales in Superstore: furniture, office supplies, technology. And maybe through your research that 3 different things are actually important for these. When you're talking about furniture, the subcategory is really important. When you're talking about office supplies, people really want to see where is that coming from. And when you're talking about technology, you're looking at that sales, that kind of who is the big sales. So this is when you're thinking about a category, a grouping of categories, that different things are important for different categories. There is a way to actually have it so you have different sheets showing up in that same tooltip. This is the same view, depending on which category you're hovering over. And this was something that totally changed my life and was super easy. I ended up reading I believe his name was, oh my gosh, what was it? Get Busy With It. Was that his username? I can't remember.
Sir Visalat?
Sir Visalat, thank you. It was an old blog. Like he had that posted in 2018, but he had talked about something similar to this concept and it completely changed my game. It looks really slick. It looks really cool. And it helps to jam pack information in small spaces, which I think all of us have issues with when you're with Tableau, right? Unless you're able to have a big giant viz, which I'm not. I got a little small space. So to actually do this, the first thing you're going to do is insert a viz into the tooltip. So here I've just inserted that map. So when I do this, again, it's just going to bring up that map across all those categories, right? It's not actually going to change. So we're doing the same thing that we did when we just did the viz and tooltip. But what's important here is it's spitting out that code for me. And that code is what's important. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take that code and I'm going to use it to create a calculated field. Here I just named it tooltip viz by category, but I have here, if the category is furniture, I want the code for the subcategory feed, right? And then if the category is office supplies, I'm going to pump out that code for the map view. And again, I'm just getting this code from doing the insert as if I'm inserting this normally, taking that code, deleting it off my tool. So it's not actually showing up. I'm creating this calculated field, and then I'm putting that calculated field as an attribute into the tooltip. So what it's actually doing is, again, it is throwing that code in depending on which category you hover over. Like everything in Tableau, this does require your data to be structured in a certain way. But I was personally working with data structured sort of like this, and this was a really great option for me to be able to look at different data points depending on things like category or certain measures. And what will happen once you've done that is you hover over furniture, it's going to show a totally different viz than when you hover over technology or when you hover over office supplies. It's really simple when you look at it, and once you kind of crack the code, it's like, I get it. Again, playing with that filter is always kind of annoying. So if you have issues, and it does, require your data to be formatted, but if your data is formatted in such a way that you're able to kind of group these categories together in one view, it's a really great way to differentiate between different categories. And again, try to lead your user to a certain kind of data point. Again, we're really lucky. We work with a statistician over here. Roshni is very close with her. She's great. And she'll come to us and say, I know that this data point is really important for this group of individuals. And this data point is really important for this group of individuals. And this is my opportunity to be able to separate them and show different data points of different individuals, and not allow people to kind of get distracted by the things they always get distracted by, and instead show things that have been backed with statistics. And it's super easy once you get the hang of it. And that's about as fancy as I've ever gotten with tooltips, although I'm sure I will get fancier as I play around with them more. But it's a super underutilized thing. It can be really great. I think it's something that I've become very passionate about because of a size constraint. It's somewhere to put information, and it doesn't take up another container in your view. And that's really awesome. So that is my presentation. I don't know if we were stopping for questions here or if we were waiting for after.
So we're going to go ahead and do questions now. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. Laura, that was amazing. You knocked it out of the park, and there's a whole bunch of like, oh my God, Tableau can do that. So you've definitely blown a few minds in this process.
It was super cool. Super cool.
So thank you so much for doing this. If you want to learn more about Laura, we are going to be spotlighting her in a future Meet a Community Members session in November. So we can learn all about Queens and Worcester, and maybe learn about some of those cute kittens that are in your picture.
Yes, I do foster kittens. Those are mine in the photo, but I do foster. So depending on when we're meeting, I might still have fosters in my house. Kitten season is heavy in the summer, so that is the best. Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Laura. We are gonna go ahead and move forward to Jenn's presentation, but check out the chat, Laura, and yeah, feel free to answer questions there. So let's hear a little bit about Jenn. So Jenn is a senior research analyst at the University of Arizona. She's a data science mentor at RStudio, an adjunct faculty member at the College for Creative Studies, and the founder of Schilling Data Studio, data visualization training and consulting agency. I don't know where she has the time for all of this. Jenn has over a decade of experience in data viz and data science, and enjoys teaching and sharing her knowledge with others to support better data communication. And I'm really excited about this because she's going to be talking about data viz best practices. And we all, get into Tableau and we're like, yeah, let's put some charts together. But there's a whole lot of science behind the scenes, and having a better understanding of that science can actually help you build more impactful visualizations. So Jenn, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited to share this with you. Let me just get my screen sharing set up properly. All right, so there we go. All right, so welcome. I'm so happy you're here. Today I'm going to share some data visualization best practices based on mostly on principles from design. So I just had a lovely introduction, but I'm Jenn. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm really glad you're here. I think almost everything from my intro page was already said. So I just want to say that I really love data viz and I love design. And so I'm really excited to get to share some data viz best practices with you today. At the end of today's presentation, you'll be able to summarize and implement key data viz concepts, including pre-attentive attributes, Gestalt principles, and color best practices. So what do you need to know to visualize data? Here are 3 key topics that we'll discuss today that I think are useful to understand when visualizing data. First, we'll talk about pre-attentive attributes, which are visual encodings that allow our brains, they're visual encodings that our brains process actually without our conscious awareness. Next, we're going to talk about the Gestalt principles of visual perception, which were established by the Gestalt School of Psychology in the early 1900s based on how people interact with and create order from visual stimuli. So basically, how do people process different visualizations and create meaning from it? And then we're going to talk about some basic color principles. And by understanding these 3 topics, we can create effective data visualizations that are easy for the audience to understand and engage with. And the goal of using these concepts is to reduce the cognitive load of the data viz, which means that we're reducing the effort that people have to put in order to understand it. And Laura just talked a lot about the user, and the big part of this is thinking about the user as well, and how can we make it as easy as possible for them to understand the data visualization. So before we get started, I just want to do a little bit of a prior knowledge check and ask if you have heard of the pre-attentive attributes or Gestalt principles before, and I have a little poll. There we go, thank you. We just got the link in the chat, and I'm going to just switch my slides over. So if you click on that link in the chat, you should see a little poll where you can select the options, and there we go. Oh, awesome. Okay, I see responses coming in, so that's great. So slightly more people have heard of the Gestalt principles and the pre-attentive attributes, and also a pretty large proportion of people are saying that these concepts are new to me, which is great. So I'm going to explain both sets of concepts and then also how you can apply them in a data viz. So thanks for joining my poll, and we're going to do one more of these a little bit later. But this is great. Awesome. Let me switch back over to my slides. Okay, so now we've got another little game. Let me make sure I'm sharing my right screen. Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to do actually another little game, but this time you're going to put something in the chat. And so on the next slide, I'm going to show you a set of numbers, and you might have seen something like this before, especially if you've read some of the books that were mentioned earlier. I'm going to show you a set of numbers, and I'm going to ask you to identify how many times a specific number appears. And I'd just like you to type how many times you see this number in the chat. So how many times do you see the number 4 in this set of numbers? 4, 6, 4, 4, 4. All right, awesome. Seeing lots of 4s come through, 3, 3, 4. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the same slide, but with something added. And also I wasn't specific, but I wasn't actually counting the one in the question. But some people have responded with counting, including that one, which is totally fine. But if I show you this one, which has now the 4s highlighted in a different color, it's much easier and faster to identify the 4s compared with the first example. And that's because color is helping our brains identify the 4s immediately without us having to process all the numbers or consciously look for the 4s. I could have bolded the 4s or made them larger than the other numbers or circled them. There are many ways that we can use something called pre-attentive attributes, which I'm going to explain a little more in a second, to draw attention to key pieces of information. In this case, I used a pre-attentive attribute of hue to make the 4s a different color. And by adding color to the 4s, I made it really clear what you should pay attention to in this visual. You don't have to process all of the information to figure it out. You just need to look for the 4s. And we can use this when creating data visualizations by emphasizing the most important information for the viewer so they don't have to process it all at once. And I just saw a really great question come in through the chat asking about whether this works for people with color blindness. And as long as you are using colors that meet accessibility standards, it should still work for people who have differing levels of their ability to see certain colors. And these ones should be accessible, but I think I checked that. But if you are not seeing them, oh, they're fairly similar. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next time I do this, I should make sure that I make them more different. Thank you. Someone has put in the chat that they are fairly similar to them. So thank you very much for that feedback. All right, so pre-attentive attributes can be used to help people understand data and focus the viewer's attention, and they also create a visual hierarchy. They're used to put emphasis on the most important pieces of data by providing visual cues that will automatically draw the viewer's attention. They help us enable our audience to see what we want them to see before they even know they're seeing it. And so there's 11, well, there's actually, I think there's 12 different pre-attentive attributes because I skipped motion on here, but here are 11: length, width, size, shape, orientation, curvature, added marks, enclosure, intensity or saturation, hue, and position. So in each of these examples, you'll immediately see the element that is different, whether it's longer, a different shape, oriented differently, has an extra mark, or is a different color. Your eye is just drawn to it. You don't have to search for it. And that's because our brains are hardwired to quickly pick up the differences we see in our environments. And so we can use this when we're creating data visualizations to help our audience immediately see what we want them to see. And I'm just going to talk through each of these 11 attributes briefly. So with length, an object of a different length stands out. So when we have a bar chart or a column chart, a bar that is much longer than the other bars is going to stand out. Same with a bar that's much shorter than all the other bars. In width, again, an object of a different width, that stands out. And in tree maps and 100% stacked column charts, that's kind of where this shows up. If we have in a tree map specifically, if we have a section of the tree map that is much larger than the others, that's going to stand out first to our audience. Objects of different size stand out. So in bubble charts, when we have a numeric value encoded in the size of the points as well, then our audience is drawn to the bubbles that are different sizes. When we have an object of a different shape. So in this example, I have all circles and one triangle, and the triangle is automatically going to stand out. So if you're doing something with scatter plots, you can use a different shape for different categories, or if you want to highlight a certain point, you can make that a different shape, and that will make it stand out. Orientation means that an object of a different orientation or different slant will stand out. So that means that we can see that in line charts. When there's a kind of steeper section of the line chart, that's going to stand out to our audience. And curvature is similarly seen in line charts. So in this example, I have kind of all curved lines and then a straight line. In data visualization, usually we see this in a line chart where we have kind of a section that changes kind of the curve. When we add marks, that makes things stand out. So again, in scatter plots, if we add kind of a star and we have all plus signs, that one will stand out. The enclosure one's really interesting. When we have something enclosed with a border or in a shaded area, then that stands out. So this is really helpful if you're trying to draw attention to a certain area of a visualization or a chart. Maybe you have a trend over time and you're showing a forecasted section. If you put the forecasted section in a shaded area or in a rectangle or something like that, that's going to draw attention immediately to that area. Or if you want to kind of not highlight the forecasted section as much, maybe you could use a border or something like that to show the area where you have your kind of historical values. With color, you have intensity and hue. And so intensity is how strong the color is. So here, whether it's dark gray to light gray or other colors like that. And hue is just changing the color. So again, if a point is a different color or a different intensity, then that will stand out to the viewer. And position, when you have something that's out of alignment or in a different position than the other pieces of your chart, then that will stand out. So while we won't discuss in much detail the pre-attentive attributes in text, they can also be used in text. And so if you are creating, with headings in a graph, if you put your heading in a larger size, that's going to tell your audience to pay attention to that first. If you're bolding text, like we just saw in the tooltips, if you're making a font a different color in the tooltips, or you're making it bold or italics, that's going to also make it stand out. So you can use these pre-attentive attributes in text as well. So we're going to take a look at a comparison between different pre-attentive attributes with numeric data. And through this example, we're going to look at how color, size, length, and position perform when we're trying to make a comparison or evaluate numbers. And the two numbers we're going to be comparing just in this little example are the University of Arizona total online fall enrollment in fall 2015 and fall 2021. And our university, like I'm sure many universities, have experienced a large growth in online enrollment over the recent past. And so we're going to see if we can tell how large that growth has been. So first, in this example, I'm going to use color. So comparing two numeric values using only color is pretty difficult if we're trying to quantify the difference. We can tell that fall 2021 is darker and therefore probably more, but we can't really quantify how much darker blue it is than 2015. If we're looking at size, we can make the circle size correspond to the enrollment values. And I can tell you here the actual enrollment, I'm sorry, I didn't say that first, but the actual enrollment is 362 in fall 2015 and 7,352 in 2021. So it's a very large increase. So if we look at size and just make the circles a different size based off of the enrollment, we can tell that the fall 2015 circle is smaller than the fall 2021 one, but it's a little bit difficult to see how much larger the fall 2021 circle is. Using length to encode the enrollment numbers, we can more precisely and perhaps more easily compare the enrollment in the 2 years. And if we use position, again, we can more precisely and easily compare the two falls. So as humans, we're actually really good at comparing length of bars and position of dots from a common baseline, as in the last two visuals on this slide. If we want our audience to focus on comparison or be able to judge relative size of a value, length and position are generally better than color and size. Especially with color, it's not always clear which color is greater. So it's best to use the length and position encodings for quantitative data like numbers, and then other attributes like color and hue for qualitative attributes like distinguishing between different colors. And color and size can also be useful for highlighting key information, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. We did look at, we looked at some heat maps in the Tooltips and Tooltips, cool tricks, if I can say that right. And certainly heat maps are very useful encodings. I'm not saying that we shouldn't use heat maps. It just depends what you want your user to pay attention to. And if we're trying to just kind of highlight certain areas of a heat map or areas of data, and we just want people to kind of get a general sense of what's cooler and warmer or less or more, heat maps are a great way to go. But if you want people to be able to really precisely compare numbers, then things like using bar graphs and points are a little bit better. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gestalt Principles. So the Gestalt Principles of visual perception were established by the Gestalt School of Psychology in the early 1900s based on research of how people interact with and create order from visual stimuli. The psychologists involved with the research theorized that we tend to group elements, look for patterns, and reduce complex images to their simplest forms. We can use these principles to design data visualizations that are going to help the viewer more easily understand them. And when we implement these principles in data viz, we can reduce the cognitive load or the amount of processing the viewer must take on to understand the data, because the principles are based on how people naturally interpret and process visual elements. So there's 6 principles I've included here. And these are really about how we group things together. So with proximity, we think that elements that are close together belong to the same group. So here on the slide, I've made 3 columns of dots. And so we just kind of see those 3 columns because they're grouped together. In data visualization, we can use this when we're creating tables by adding more space between rows or columns to help the viewer easily see the table, kind of the rows and columns. And it also applies in scatter plots because we're naturally going to find groups of data that are close together and try and make meaning out of them. And those groups may or may not be meaningful, but our brain is going to start interpreting them as groups nonetheless. So this is just a useful thing to keep in mind as you're building visualizations as well, because your user is going to look at a visualization and try to start making meaning based off of these things like the Gestalt principles. With similarities, when we see elements that look similar, we also think of them belonging to a group. So they could be similar color or shape or size. And again, this can be used in table design by shading alternate rows. It's also useful in plotting data because we can make data points different colors for different categories. And then our audience will automatically know that all of these points of one color belong to one group and all these points of another color belong to another group. Same thing when we're using color in line graphs or bar graphs. Enclosure, this is also a pre-attentive attributes. So elements that are physically enclosed are thought of as belonging to a group. And as we discussed earlier, this can be used to distinguish groups within a data set or within a graph. Closure is really interesting. The brain actually fills in gaps to create a recognizable image. And we perceive the whole before we perceive the parts. So we can use this in data visualization to remove borders and backgrounds from charts because the brain will perceive the whole chart together without additional elements like borders and backgrounds. And removing these extra elements actually allows the data to stand out more. And this part, the kind of borders and backgrounds piece, I think is something Tableau does really nicely in that it just the kind of default settings in a Tableau visualization have the light grid lines and kind of fade the borders and the grid lines in the backgrounds into the background, but so that they don't stand out so much. With continuity, elements that are ordered in a line or a curve are thought of as belonging to a group. And we look for the smoothest path and naturally create continuous lines. And this can be used to remove axes in a bar graph because the brain will perceive all the bars to be lined up. And it also applies in scatter plots because our brain will follow a continuous path between points, again, whether or not that's actually meaningful. And then connection, elements that are physically connected are thought of as belonging to a group. And connections are really powerful association. And we see this mostly in line graphs in data visualization. One important thing to note here about the Gestalt principles and how we view data in general is that we're always looking for structure and relationships. And it's important to keep this in mind as we design data visualizations because our viewers will look for structures and relationships whether or not they're actually there. And of course, there's interpretation involved when viewing data viz, and that extends beyond these immediate perceptions. But it's important to understand these pre-attentive attributes and Gestalt principles because they influence a person's initial engagement with a data visualization, and we can use them to highlight important information, draw attention to a certain area of the graph, and create a hierarchy of visual elements. And as I mentioned earlier, they reduce the cognitive load, which means that it makes it easier for our audience to process the data visualization. So I just wanted to show this quick side-by-side comparison of two graphs before and after applying Gestalt principles, as well as some other data viz design best practices. And for now, I'm just going to focus on the application of the Gestalt principles. And for the graph on the left, I did make it kind of an extreme example with these really big, bold grid lines. But I kind of wanted to make a kind of extremer example and then an example with some of the best practices added in. So with the Gestalt principles here, using closure, I removed the border because the audience will still see the whole plot area without it. I used proximity and some similarity to remove the legend and label the lines directly with their category and the final retention rate. Because the labels are the same color as the lines and close to the lines themselves, the audience will know that the labels tell them what each line represents. Connection means that the audience will follow along the lines for the school years and know that the data is connected. And one thing to note here is how much more the lines or the data stand out with the grid lines removed. And by applying just a few of the Gestalt principles, we can make it easier for our audience to see the data by reducing the amount of processing that they need to do. So we've already seen how color can be used to draw attention and highlight information or group data points together. Now I want to talk a little more specifically about the main uses of color in data visualization. So when used in a data viz or a dashboard, color should have a clear purpose and be consistent and accessible. If one color is used to indicate a specific category, it should be used consistently each time that category is included. And if one color is used to highlight an important data point, it should be used for highlighting across visualizations. And consistency helps the viewer make meaning from the use of color, and it makes it easier for them to understand the important information. You want to use color with a purpose and not just kind of arbitrarily add it, because when you use too many colors, it defeats the purpose of associating numbers with colors. Research shows that most people's short-term memory will only retain up to 5 pieces of information at one time. And the more colors you use to represent your data, the harder it becomes to read it quickly. If you need more than 5 colors in your chart, you might consider using a different chart type. So the main ways that colors used in data visualization are these 4 things. First is to highlight a data point and bring the viewer's attention to it immediately. You can also use it to designate different categories or labels, and that can be used to help the viewer differentiate between different groups of data points. And then color can be used to or be applied to quantitative values, so numbers, either in a sequential or a diverging manner. So sequential color is used to show low values to high values on a continuous scale, and diverging color is used to show values above and below or below a midpoint on a continuous scale. And you want to keep in mind that you should only add color if it adds meaning and helps with understanding. And I had an example in here, but I'm going to skip over it because I have a couple best practices to add before I go too much over my time. So one of the things to remember about using color is that you want to use it consistently and sparingly. And using it consistently and sparingly helps color keep its meaning and maintains its use as a pre-attentive attribute. If you use many colors in one data viz, it's going to be harder for the audience to interpret rather than easier because they have to work to figure out what all the colors mean. And we want to choose colors strategically to add information or context to the data. And sometimes we don't even need color if it won't add meaning. So in my example here, I have different colors for different races and ethnicities, but I can also show it without the colors for different race ethnicities, and the viewer will still get the same information and they won't have to work to figure out why one bar is red and why one bar is blue. With consistency, we want to use the same color to highlight information and the same color for specific categories across visualizations. And these are probably a little bit small here, but in my first example, I'm using different colors to represent female, male, and not reported in each of the 3 visualizations. And then in the second set, I'm using the same colors for female, male, and not reported across the 3 visualizations. So when you're using it consistently, the audience only has to understand what is male or what color is for female, male, and not reported one time, and then they can understand all 3 graphs. Whereas in the first row, they have to each time check the legend and remember or figure out rather what each color is and what changed. And when you use color like this consistently, it can also be used to signal a change to the audience. So if a new topic is introduced or the tone changes in a presentation, you can use a new color to highlight the information in that section as a cue to the audience that something has changed. It's also important to keep color meaning in mind. So some colors already have meaning, and the colors can have different meanings in different cultures. So it's important to keep the meaning of certain colors in mind when you're applying color to a data viz. In American culture, usually when red is used with numbers, it typically means something is bad. And that's useful if we're showing a key indicator and we want to show negative performance. But it's really important to keep in mind, especially at my university, where red is one of our brand colors at the University of Arizona. So we want to be careful about where we use red in data visualization. And at the University of Arizona, we usually start with the blues in our color palette first before going to the reds, especially if we're looking at financial data. Color can also evoke emotions. And so when you're applying color to a data visualization, you want to think about what tone you want that graph to have and pick colors to match that tone. And another meaning that we perceive in color is that darker means greater or more. And so when highlighting information, you want to use a darker color for the important piece and a lighter color for the other pieces, so that signals to the audience that you want that this darker color piece is more important. And it applies to sequential and diverging color gradients. So you want to make sure that you use the darkest color for the largest value and the lightest color for the smallest value, which is what I'm doing on the right-hand map on this slide, rather than what I've got on the left-hand map, which uses the dark color for the lightest value, because that just goes against our kind of natural association of darker color, higher value. And as was mentioned in the chat already, it's really important to think about accessibility when you're using color in visualizations. And so you want to make sure you check your color palettes against color blindness checkers, making sure that your visualizations will be accessible for everybody viewing them. And there are online checkers that you can run color palettes through, or you can upload an image of a graph to check that the colors are accessible. And another test you can do is look at your visualization in grayscale to see if the colors are still differentiable. And this is not so much for accessibility, but for effectiveness. And to check for effective use of color, you can show your visualization to a colleague or a friend and ask them what they notice first or where their eyes go. And you can also, if you're just yourself, you can look away or kind of go to another screen and do something else for a little bit and then come back to your visualization and look at where your eyes are drawn and see what you've noticed and what key message you take away from it. And this goes probably just not for color, but also all of the things I've talked about in terms of data viz design. It's really important to try and test your final visualizations for effectiveness. And it's really useful if you can ask a colleague or friend to look at it. And then you can see if the main message that you intended is what's coming across in your visualization. All right, so I know I am running a little bit over my time, so I want to kind of wrap things up. I covered a lot of concepts in a very short amount of time today. I talked about pre-attentive attributes, which help focus the audience's attention on a part of the graph or chart because our brains immediately notice difference. I also shared a set of Gestalt principles, which help reduce the cognitive load for the audience because our brains group and reduce visual elements. And finally, I shared a few best practices for using color in data visualization. So I really hope you found these tips helpful. There is so much more to share on data viz best practices. We really only touched the surface today, but hopefully these little tips will help you in your future data visualization. And it's been shown that we remember things better when we reflect on them in the moment. So I'd just like to offer a really quick opportunity for you to reflect on what I shared. And it should be the same link that we just were doing. And I'm going to flip to a different slide here. Thank you, Roshni, for putting that in the chat. So if you could just share a key takeaway from this session in that link, that'll be really helpful for all of us to kind of reflect on what we learned for a moment. And I'll stop talking so you can do that. And I also saw a couple questions in the chat, so I'll read those as well.
Great. So Jenn, one of the questions while people are answering is there's a red bar that illustrates the Gestalt principle or in the chart, and the labels on the bar are not easily visible. Is there a reason for that?
Oh, oh, yes. Okay, so that was my example. The labels, that was just me sizing my chart not very well.
Right.
In the slide that I had originally made this from, I had walked through each step of doing it, and so my one that I kind of had there was just these two side by side, and I apologize for that. That wasn't easy to see. So I'm sorry about that. I also saw if someone asked about the presentations will be available after today's meeting. The recording is available. I don't know about
if you'd like to share the slides, just let us know. Just Slack us later, and we'll figure it out, and we can put them on the page if you're able or willing to share the slides.
Awesome.
But the recording will be available on what month is it? August. August AG Tug page, hopefully later this week, if not early next week.
Awesome. And thank you all so much for putting some things in this takeaway. We've got the importance of color, really helpful reminders about not overdoing it with color. There are many options to make things stand out. Check your graph and grayscale, reevaluate. Oh, lots of stuff about color. I plan to use pre-attentive attributes more prominently with color limited to highlighting. Awesome. Bar charts my instincts were right. Bar charts are great for comparing numbers. Yeah, yes, they are. There's something called the perceptual tasks, which I didn't have a chance to talk about, but that's a whole body of research. And what they do is show people the same data in different graphical formats, or maybe it's not always the same data, but they show people data in pie charts and area charts and bar graphs and all kinds of stuff, and look at actually quantitatively about how well people can estimate and compare the values between those two, between the charts. I've explained that very poorly, but it's super interesting.
Right, and there's a whole conference all about it. If you really want to dig into the science behind a lot of this, IEEE has a visualization conference. IEEE Viz. It's actually in October, I believe. They do a hybrid, or they're doing a hybrid version this year. But I've gone a couple of years in the past, and or the virtual version, and it's actually really great. There's all sorts of cool things that you learn about, like, oh, hey, maybe the width of my bars actually matters in terms of how well people are able to differentiate between the length of the two bars. How does that change their perception? This was really great, Jenn. There's a whole lot of really good comments, and there's some talk about pie charts. So maybe that's a session for the future. So thanks so much, Jenn. Feel free to answer any of the questions, and yeah, let us know about slides if you you want to share them later.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you so much. I really enjoyed getting to share this. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And if you want to learn more about Jenn, Jenn is going to be our Meta community member spotlight next month, I believe. Yes, next month. So we're going to learn all about things like operations, computational operations research. I want to say, I feel like I'm missing a word in that phrase, but we'll find out next month.
Yeah, you got it. Computational operations research. Yep, that's what I got.
Management?
No, just
Okay, no management in there. Okay, all right. All right. So Ginny, if you want to take it away.
Sure thing. So just to give you a heads up on what's coming next. Well, first, we want you to tell us what you thought of today's meeting. This form is really short and sweet, so let us know what we did well, what we can improve on, and give us some ideas for what you'd like to see in future meetings. We definitely want to keep this pertinent. Also, our next HE Tug is on September 13th at 3 Eastern. We will, as Roshni said, be meeting our community member, Jenn Schilling, and we still don't have a tips and tricks presenter for September yet, so that is to be announced. And we are going to meet Dennis Cow from Carleton University, who is going to show and share his visit of the day on school-age digital connectivity. So if you haven't seen that, it is super awesome. And then, of course, we always want to hear from our HE Tug community members. So if you'd like to present at a future meeting, it could be this year, it could be next year, it could be on just about anything that you want it to be. Please fill out the form and let us know.
And Ginny did say we are still looking for someone to present September tips and tricks. Uncle Sam there wants you to present. Just so you know, September 13th is not only Uncle Sam Day, because we like our celebrations here at HE Tug, but it's also Day of the Programmer. It's the 256th day of the year, which for those of you who may be on the mathy side is 16 squared, and that's something magical on the math side. So Day of the Programmer, present for us.
And of course, our important links, which might address Alexandra's question that she just put in the chat, how to join our Tableau Higher Ed Slack group. We're going to be putting that link in the chat box right now. So you should be able to click on the link, go to the Slack channel, and just sign up using your .edu or equivalent email address. If you are having trouble doing that, please reach out and let us know, and we can send you a direct invitation.